Welcome, everybody, to Cosmic Conversations. This is the Thursday edition, and a very special Thursday edition. We've got
Emil.
Harlan Emil Gruber here. Harlan and I met at the, I don't know, what was it called? The New Living Expo this past, some expo, right? And we immediately hit it off. I don't know if we're actually related, but of course, Harlan will be among the first to say, of course, we're all related. We're all one. Mitaku ye oyasin. Anyway, I'm going to do something really goofy. I'm going to read from the leaf of your book here. Amazing book, Portal to the New Earth. Sound, sacred geometry, and grid energies for personal and planetary transformation. Let's me read. Harlan, inspired by the work of Bucky Fuller, as we all are, and Paolo Soleri, received a degree in environmental design from Parsons School of Design in '85. I'm amazed that we didn't meet back then. I used to hang around Parsons. After studying physics at Emory University and electrical engineering at Georgia Tech and University of Miami, he worked for the design firm SITE Projects of New York before launching an independent career in 1987. He merged his interest in art, design, science into his diverse career, which includes art furniture, sound sculpture, large-scale interactive installations, and ultimately future habitations, which I hope we'll talk a little bit about. His work has been exhibited in a variety of settings, from galleries in New York City and New Mexico to Burning Man in the Black Rock Desert of Nevada, as well as many other transformational festivals around the world. He's now focusing on his lifelong interest of conceiving future environments to assist in the transformation and healing of the earth. Welcome, Harlan.
All right. Thank you, Phil. And thanks to everyone here today. I'm super excited to be part of this conversation, share what I do.
All right. So basically, my first question is, well, how are you? What's going on?
Oh, well, I like to always say I'm doing awfully great. And so it's true. My life, incarnating here as a human on Earth, it's all about duality, polarity. And I really pride myself in being manifesting extremes. So I'm actually doing extremely great. And because of the duality, there's a lot of awfulness. So let's not go into or even speak about that. But it's quite interesting that I am embodying this duality all the time. But the extremely great is the fact that I'm here right now today speaking with this amazing group of people. And of course, the title of this talk is something that's kind of new, but I did this talk just recently at Burning Man, where I give like my whole overarching life story as a galactic transformation agent, which kind of encompasses basically everything I've been guided to do my entire life. And so, that's what we're going to we'll be able to touch on any and everything that I've done because of this broad scope. But also it's talking about being here, incarnating as a higher dimensional divine soul into human 3D form in this crazy scenario that we're all experiencing right now, and the shift that's taking place, because I've been about the shift pretty much my whole life. So we'll go into that more, I'm sure, in this conversation.
Yeah, let's start with Burning Man. Now, Burning Man, how long have you been at Burning Man? I think you've been at Burning Man a long time. So let's start with what you just did at Burning Man and work backwards.
Yeah, that's good. And I'm right now based in Joshua Tree, but I was based in New York City for most of my life. And I was then moved to Taos, New Mexico around 96. But in 95, I was in New Mexico with a good friend of mine who also happened to be we had a mutual friend, the author Eric Davis. And he's a very interesting author in person in the whole psychedelic community. He was very close to Terence McKenna and all. I knew Terence, and I'm going to get into that in maybe a little later. But we knew he was going to this little gathering of a few thousand people that went out to the Black Rock Desert called Burning Man. 1995 was the last year that Burning Man happened in the Black Rock Desert without any city plan, without any rules, anything. And there were drive-by shooting ranges. There were no streets. People couldn't find their tents. I didn't go. I backed out. I was in Taos and I said, it's 1,200 miles. I finally moved to Taos, and with a group from Taos, New Mexico that started going in 1997, I went in 1999. I've only missed 2 years since 1999. It was 2018 and 23 that I missed for various reasons, but otherwise I've gone every single year from 1999. But what's interesting is that 1999 was the first year that Burning Man adopted its current city plan that it still uses to this day, which is this big overarching U shape that goes from 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock and then is open playa. So it actually, Burning Man changed more from 95 to 99 than it changed from 99 to now. Of course, the population has quadrupled. It was 20,000 in 99. It's the 80,000. It's actually gone back down to about 70,000 lately. But I've gone every year. And so after going for several years, I was seeing all these interactive installations that you could climb on. And I finally said, I'm going to build something to bring out to the deep playa. And it was 2004 that I brought this, it's kind of cut off here, but this is the 1111 Diamond Portal. And the thing about this 1111 Diamond Portal is I actually thought of the design and the shape while I was studying at Parsons back in 1984 as a golden ratio inspired shape. And so then after going to Burning Man, I was like, I know, I'm going to make, it was just a little paper model. It's funny, it's in the leaf of that book. I show it near where you just read from, the original paper model. And I said, I'm going to build it as big as I can and people can climb up on it. And then I also play bass guitar. I invented this low frequency feedback device by playing my bass guitar late at night. And I was like, what's the lowest note the bass can feed back? Because I'm into Jimi Hendrix, the Grateful Dead, loud hard rock music where they get the guitars to feed back. And I lean the bass against the amp and I tune the strings to subsonic notes, like literally somewhere between 5 and 15 hertz. Like you could see the string move. It doesn't make a note. It's below audible, but it makes a sound. It makes a rumbling sound. And I actually did performances around New York City in the 80s and 90s with this device that I labeled the quasar wave transducer. I just gave it a poetic name. It was this 2 bass guitar strings mounted directly to an amplifier that would just make this weird rumbling, purring sound. And whenever I showed it at various events, people would be like, yeah, so that's kind of cool. And it was kind of cool, but it was still just like weird sitting there rumbling away. The 1111 Diamond Portal, I hid it inside of it. So when people came up to it and climbed up the ladder and sat in it or leaned against it, the whole thing was purring with this weird vibrations that would change over time. Even to this day, someone came up to me and was talking about it. He goes, oh yeah, you're getting the sound of the earth in it. I'm like, no, it's not exactly the sound of the earth, but it is this random chaotic feedback. So between the structure from 1984 and the quasar wave, which is around 1980, I combined the two in 2004. And that set me on my life's path for the past 20 years of building interactive installations that use sound. And the whole intention, though, of the Diamond Portal is to be a key to shift the earth into the next vibrational dimension. That's how I termed it. Like I've been about the whole 2012 shift. As soon as I heard about 2012 and December 21st, and the whole idea that humanity is evolving and shifting. So I designed and built this to be a key. And if you think about it, a key is just a little tiny thing that doesn't cost hardly anything, but you need them to access the most important things in your life, like your car or your house. The most expensive, most important things you can't use except for with this little tiny, very cheap thing. So the Diamond Portal is very similar. It's just a little tiny plywood structure you can go into, but it acts as a key to this transformation we're taking place in.
Well, that's great,
Long
Harlan.
answer.
I have to sign off now, but I definitely want to have you back. Matt's going to take over. We definitely want to have you back in December because sacred geometry, sacred divine architecture, this is where I live. And
Right.
I also play. So there's a lot to, as they
Yeah, yeah.
say,
Well,
unpack here. Okay?
that's great. So I'm not going to go into that stuff too much in today's talk. We'll save
Right.
it for the next talk. The sacred geometry and the architecture is what I've actually been lecturing the most on. But I like to give more of my background, and that's what we'll dive into a little bit more, like how I came to learn all this and why I use all of this and the whole galactic, consciousness that's coming in. So we'll see you, Phil, next time. And I'm so glad to be with the rest of you. I know you have a whole program lined up of various things to do, but we'll see you, Phil. And then thanks, Matt, for taking over hosting.
Yeah, this
Okay.
reminds me, your portal installations at Burning Man are just stunning. So how do you design it to be both visually striking and energetically activating at the same time?
Well, I don't really consider the visually striking part of it too much. And I actually like to keep them very simple and minimal. But the visuals of them have to do with their shape and then the colors. Like it just so happened that this green came about through a vision on a DMT trip. And I was guided to communicate, it was communicating with me in colors. And when I was designing this for Burning Man, my first thought was to make it black, like the monolith from 2001. But I thought black is just going to be hot and dusty. And I had this green panel that I got from this vision. And without thinking of the significance of green, I'm like, I'm just going to make it this green. Well, green's the heart chakra. And, through heart math and Dan Winter's work, when your heart rhythms are in golden ratio is when you're in a state of coherence and bliss. And you can even see this circle kind of makes a heart shape. And the closer you get to it, the more that heart shape happens with this. It becomes a real heart shape. Both of those things were not planned in the design of this. They were just synchronicities. The green is the heart chakra and the shape is the heart. And then the golden ratio relates to it. So a lot of my stuff just comes about intuitively. And then, but the significance, the other part of your question, to make them like activating. So I do research that. And all of the other portals that I have designed are based but typically on geometries that relate to the evolution of the Earth's energy body or other geometries that are like these various different, containers to be spaces to, be activating, for the activation and transformation of consciousness. So that is at the forefront of it. The visual parts, I just keep it very minimal and just a place that you can go and kind of like meditate without being overly stimulated by the visuals.
They definitely have garnered a lot of reactions. What's been the most unexpected reaction someone has had interacting with one of your installations?
Well, not so much unexpected because I've always had the intention that these are spaces that can facilitate this evolution of consciousness from, just being okay with our false matrix and getting a job and getting paid money and buying a house and driving to the box stores. That's the current consciousness to waking up to realize that everything is sacred, not just our human body, not just animals or plants, but minerals, the earth, our entire world, to see it all as connected and sacred, and then choose to live and create a world where we build and inhabit the earth in the most beautiful, sacred, harmonious way. So, to that end, right from the very beginning with this diamond portal, and then throughout the dozen or more different installations I've made in the past 20 years, people have found my email and sent me testimonials where they've actually had a real transformation of consciousness. One of my favorites was someone that had seen the first three of my portals. And when I had made the big sky blue sapphire portal, he came up to me and he says, I live in Detroit. And because of your portal installations, I've started the Detroit Evolutionary Laboratory. And we've got urban farming, we teach yoga, we show like Zeitgeist and other movies. And we're here to awaken the community to these kind of things. And that's just one of a dozen or several dozen different times that I've met people that have actually had the intention of the piece. And so I kind of, know that the can work. It's not like it's absolutely going to work. Like it's not like every single person that sits in one is going to have that, possible reaction to it. But I have gotten the testimonials from quite a number of people that they do actually function in the way they are intended.
Incredible. You talk a lot about this evolving new Earth. So what does that look to you like? What does it look like to you socially, spiritually, architecturally?
I first read The Cosmic Trigger by Robert Anton Wilson, which is the follow up to his Illuminatus trilogy. That doesn't talk so much about the shift, but it does talk about all the esoteric teachings from Kabbalah to the I Ching to ancient Egypt and all of these, things that have been on Earth for a long time that are about this shift of consciousness, that have existed for, many thousands of years. But the most significant book on this path was when I read Ken Carey's Starseed Transmission in 1984, the same time that I designed this diamond portal back then. And I kind of feel in retrospect that there may have been a connection between this channeled Pleiadian information and that in some ways this may be very subconsciously a channeled Pleiadian technology to facilitate the shift. So he describes very clearly in that book, what this shift looks like, which is, in a nutshell, it's pretty much all of humanity waking up to a global consciousness. It doesn't mean that we lose our own personal ego and individual way of thinking, but we see that we are all one on this one planet. And it's also kind of like Gaia waking up inside of us. The whole planet Earth wakes up inside of all of us so that we'll all choose to live in a way that honors the Earth, and we all then live to beautify the Earth. Actually, one of my favorite architects that I discovered while then studying, you heard in my bio, I knew about Buckminster Fuller, amazing genius, and he does, talk about this design science revolution where we can live in harmony with the earth by shifting from weaponry to livingry. Then I discovered Paolo Solari, who's most well known for in Arizona, his Arcosanti, which is like an urban laboratory, but he was proposing these ideas of arcologies, which here, why not? It's funny. I'm not going to do the slideshow, but it's very easy for me to show what woke me up to this whole idea. And here's this, what I saw was an arcology that Paolo Solari drew that I saw in an art gallery in 1981 of a three-dimensionally integrated three-dimensional city that we is all ecologically integrated. He's never built something like this, but that's what he was proposing. So then I decided to study design at Parsons. And while I'm studying design, I also happened to read that Starseed Transmissions separately from that. And but what I learned about, when you go to art school, one of the key things you learn at art school is you learn, let me just go back. I love this background. You learn other people's work, art history. And I would say that's almost the most important thing for for an artist to go, because otherwise there's a lot of artists that don't study it and they come up with some new idea and someone comes along and goes, yeah, well, so and so did that 50 years ago. You think you're like a genius, but you should have seen that. So it's best to know what's been done and then you can stand on their shoulders and work from there. So Bruno Taut was a German expressionist architect that right after World War I wrote this book called Alpine Architecture, where he envisioned crystal cities on mountaintops. And he was very much philosophically based in a spiritual background. And he talked about humans being the spiritual organ of the earth to beautify the earth. But if you think about it, where in the world have you ever seen a crystal city on top of a mountaintop? And when I was just talking to someone recently about that, they said, oh, yes, that exists already on the higher dimensions. There are light cities on mountaintops already. And he's just talking about bringing it here into the 3D, that we could start to live and do that. But so very much aligned with this idea that, this shift that's taking place is that we will And a lot of times people look at what I'm doing and they're like, oh yeah, that's great, but it's going to take 1,000 years before we ever get to that. We're kind of stuck. And when you do you turn on the news and you listen to the mainstream, you don't hear anything much about this galactic shift, and we're still kind of entrenched in a very 3D world. But I really do feel that it's turned like a light switch turning on, and it's imminent. The flicker is happening, and within 5 or 10 years, I could really see that we'll be actually really living this way very quickly. It's not going to take the 1,000 or even 100 years. At least that's my hope,
Absolutely.
holding that vision.
Yeah. How do you envision the future cities integrating sacred geometry and consciousness into their design?
Well, the consciousness, that goes kind of without saying. Everything that's in our built environment came about because we thought about it. Someone like, that's what consciousness is kind of like our thoughts, right? Wouldn't you kind of equate consciousness with whatever you're thinking, whatever you're seeing, thinking is what you're conscious of. So every single building, every single object in our environment that's made by humans came about by consciousness. So with this shift of consciousness, we'll start to create, environments very much more aligned with the way the universe itself functions, with the way life itself functions. Like I don't see these cities actually being built as much as being grown almost, because we'll be aligning with the way nature is able to function, and we'll be able to then integrate that into how we create our environments. I forget, that was the consciousness part. What was the other part of the question? Do you remember how you worded it? Because there was
Yeah.
another facet to it.
How do you envision the future cities integrating sacred geometry and consciousness
Oh,
into their
yeah.
design?
So the sacred geometry part, that's very interesting. So I don't have a good image of my 12 spiral city, but I have a whole chapter in my book. So I started thinking about this idea of using this sacred geometrical city plan that was laid out by the author John Michel. John Michel is quite a notable figure. He published his first book in 1969 called View Over Atlantis. It was republished as an expanded book in, I think, 1982 or 1983, right when I was studying at Parsons, called The New View Over Atlantis. And he is actually one of the key people responsible for popularizing the concept of ley lines. And that's what the book went into detail about, discovering and learning about all the ley lines and earth energy grid. But he also talked about ancient units of measurement. But then right after that book came out in the mid to late 80s, he published a book called Dimensions of Paradise. And it's all about this two-dimensional sacred city design, sacred geometry called the Heavenly City or the New Jerusalem. And it's a diagram of 12 circles arranged in a circle. And so I then took that and I extrapolated that into 3 dimensions by spiraling them upwards over time. So you don't build all the spirals at once. You allow the city to grow naturally over time. So that's the main idea that I've been working on fleshing out. And like I say, I have this whole chapter in my book on the 12 spiral city that is a sacred geometrical based on his research is an ancient, like a discovery of an ancient city plan called the New Jerusalem Heavenly City. And then he also talks about these dimensions. He doesn't actually one-to-one relate these numerical dimensions in that book, but he does talk about it. And so the dimensions of the city are very much all laid out very precisely. Each of the spiraling ramps are 2,160 feet in diameter, which is the same diameter of the moon in miles. And the entire circle of them is 7,920, the diameter of the earth in miles in feet. So it actually relates these cosmic proportions into feet. And feet and miles are no random thing. They are actually harmonically related to the structure of the universe on cosmic scales. The sun, for instance, has a radius of 432,000 miles. 432 is a harmonic number. And I've heard other people talk about this. It's all harmonic ratios, and the miles and feet are profoundly important measurements that are not random at all, and using them and using them in harmonic numbers is actually quite significant. And it's just like that 432 hertz to 440 hertz. That same disconnect going to 440 hertz is the same disconnect between inches, feet, and miles going to the metric system. The metric system is kind of designed to like lock us down into a very simple 3D consciousness where these other numbers and proportions connect us harmonically to the harmonic nature and structure of the universe.
It's so incredible that you've studied sound so much as well as sacred geometry. How do you see sound functioning as a transformative force in both individuals and ecosystems?
And it's funny, I just met someone who is a sound healer, but she works in a completely different way. She doesn't do the sound baths. And the way she described her work was really profound as, these keys to, clearing energies and shifting things. But of course, sound right now is blowing up the whole sound baths to help people transform their consciousness just through sound. But I mean, it's really a funny question in a way because we take sound so for granted, but the fact that, and I'm a big fan of Terence McKenna, and he really got deep into this, but the fact that we make these sounds with our mouth that are words that we understand with all this meaning. So already sound has been profoundly connected to human, evolution for all of humanity ever since we, began to speak that in a powerful way. But even more so than that, it's seen how sound creates cymatic patterns, and those bring about, geometric structures. So, I do my very first chapter in my book is just a very quick, very short chapter that touches very quickly and lightly on all these profound aspects of sound. But if you just think about it, both in science and religion, science has the Big Bang that formed the universe, and in the Bible, it was first the Word. So, I mean, we could, that question alone is enough of a conversation for hours and hours on end. I don't even know where else, which avenue to go down to see how profound sound is and how it could be used to, help with this transformation or shift taking place. So I think that was a pretty good, concise answer to the, incredible significance. I even called my chapter Sound the cornerstone of creation.
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
it
Yeah.
really and you know what? Creation's not done. The way we see the earth and the universe and the galaxies, this is probably just the beginning of where it's going to go. It's going to even get 10, it's going to keep creating, keep getting more complex. And also, I mean, time is not a real linear thing. So there is levels of creation that we can't even fathom, because it's not like we're linearly going into creation over time. It is kind of from our perspective right now. But yeah, the immensity of the possibilities of creation and sound is literally the foundation, the key, the cornerstone to everything that happens. So, yeah, great question. I mean, we could spend the rest of our conversation just going deeper into it, but I'm sure you've got some other really good questions.
Oh, maybe I should just ask one more and then let you talk for a little bit about topics you like. But this question, what first inspired you to explore the intersection of sacred geometry, sound, and planetary transformation?
Well, I think that's a really good question to kind of go back to like the whole beginning of how I became a galactic transformation and just like touch on my, lifelong journey into it rather than specifically getting down to that, exactly how I got into, using the sound and geometry, very specifically. I'd have to say, uh, Eric von Daniken wrote Chariots of the Gods when I was a kid. I was about 10 years old, and that book was super popular. Like there were spin-offs of it everywhere. So Eric von Däniken proposes that the Bible is actually a very literal account of ETs coming to Earth and messing with us, like telling us they're God, telling us they're angels, setting up this religion. And I was like, that makes sense to me. So I fully aligned with this idea of our monotheistic religions being some other beings such as us that are kind of interacting and controlling us. So that kind of set me on this cosmic path of ETs and our whole relationship with, other ET races and galactic consciousness. And so then I mentioned, of course, reading the starseed transmissions and learning about this Pleiadian view that consciousness is coming closer and closer to the Earth to awaken the whole Earth as one cosmic consciousness. And then I would say most profoundly was meeting Lisa Renee, who she doesn't publicly speak anymore, but she does release a newsletter every month on her website, Energetic Synthesis. But back when I met her in 2009, she was a little more public, and she is like a starseed counselor. She helps people that are, trying to integrate their starseed self into this, false matrix paradigm. And she did this reading for me, and it started right off by saying, "You're not like all the other starseeds that I work with, and you're not even from this galaxy. You're from Andromeda, and you're bringing in the Andromedan frequencies and galactic frequencies." And as soon as she said that, she goes, "Oh, now I know why I'm such a weirdo and why I've been living such a weird life, because and that's kind of when I learned that I'm truly this galactic transformation agent." Mind you, this is 2009. I'd already been building the first four of my interactive portal installations by that time. So I was already doing, real on the grounds, nuts and bolts galactic transformation work. But then I really awakened to the fact, like, okay, that's what I'm doing here, and I'm really here to, to try to bring in these frequencies, or I'm bringing in the frequencies, through both building the portals, but even just by my very nature. Like my whole life, after I read The Cosmic Trigger back in 1978. I dropped out of college. I was going to, as you heard in that thing, I was going to Emory and Georgia Tech. And I went home and I said, "I'm not going back to school. I'm driving to California." And Timothy Leary, who I had just seen speak, was out there. And like I was fully like driving, and I just was driving and living in my van. And I've done numerous trips my whole entire life, many times physically driving and living in my van all over Turtle Island. And I see retrospectively that that is actually for me to be infusing the galactic frequencies that I embody physically, to be weaving them into the ground as this, transformation agent.
Would you say that's your pivotal moment that you began creating the portal to New Earth?
So it wasn't a pivotal moment, but a very key one working with her. And then another really important moment, though, was moving to Joshua Tree in 2014, where I started to host a little event where I came up with the name at the place. It was at Garth's Boulder Gardens. And that's where we came up with the name of the event, Portal to the New Earth, which is now, of course, the name of my website, my book, my YouTube channel. So that in some ways was almost more pivotal, can't even say the word, a pivoting point in my life that I've embraced this, being the portal to the new earth as the focus of what I'm trying to do here to awaken people to it.
Awesome. Will you just share, take the floor for 10, 15 minutes, talk about that awakening and anything you wish to share, and then I'll ask you a few more questions at the end.
What I do want to kind of then just go into a little bit more, like you're allowing me to, is like kind of like jumping back to how when I first learned about Buckminster Fuller and his book Synergetics. He also wrote Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth and a whole variety of books like Critical Path and Grunch of Giants were his last two books, where he like examines everything going on throughout all of human history and puts all the pieces of the puzzle together to see how there's always been a behind the scenes kind of control agenda that uses all of our governments and all of our world global economy as a front for them. He never completely dove into calling them the Illuminati or anything, but he definitely did see that there was a behind the scenes controlling structure going back to before history even, all of human history. And so once you start to like put all those pieces of the puzzle together and start to see the bigger picture and how we can then use our understanding of the way the universe operates, which is very much what Buckminster Fuller, proposed, talks about in his all of his writings and synergetics to see the underlying patterns that aren't what we're taught in school yet. It's like the real connections of how everything really operates. I mean, synergetics is explorations in the geometry of thinking. That's the title of the book, both physical and metaphysical. And he coined the word synergetics. He coined the word synergy, which means that the sum of the parts is greater than all of the parts taken separately. So when things come together, they have a synergetic, possibility, which is what's kind of taking place here now on Earth in the way we'll awaken and create the new Earth. And then I walked into that gallery and I saw that scroll drawing of Paolo Solari's. It can't hurt to just jump back to that because this was so formidable seeing this arcology. And so then I've extrapolated that. And this was a prompt I gave ChatGPT to look at what a three-dimensional integrated city would look like in the, so that really is what has been inspiring me is that I really I don't want to just move into another house and drive to a box store. I want to live where you walk out your door and you can pick fruits and vegetables right out of your gardens between your neighborhood and everything. When you go into a store, it's all handmade by your neighbors, or maybe it's shipped from the other side of the world because your neighbors ship stuff to them and their friends send things back. I mean, it can be a global economy, but it's not like the global economy that we see right now. It's all done with like love and sacredness. And I don't know how we're going to get there, but that is what I totally see and dream of all the time. And by holding those visions in consciousness, hopefully that will then go out into that, morphogenetic field and start to resonate. And I know I'm not the only one that sees and thinks these ideas, but we do need to start to come together. And like when people will say, "Oh, it's no, it's not going to happen. Come on, we're always going to have war. We're always going to have disease. That's just part of human nature." And it's so hard to take that step back and from the higher dimensions and see, oh no, those things are put here on planet Earth in our 3D timeline as part of our control paradigm. And it is possible to actually incarnate into a 3D reality that does not have war and disease and negativity. Or if it does have it, it's extremely minimal, if not completely erased, and not like the focus of our reality. And and the more and more people, like whoever's listening now or will be listening, to the replay of this, hopefully you resonate with this, or hopefully hearing this will help awaken this in you and be like, oh yeah, that is right. We can do that. We have a choice. We are divine, sovereign beings directly connected to source, divine source. There is no intermediary between us and the source that created everything. We are gods incarnated, and it could be way easier than we could ever imagine to do it. It's also, there's a lot of talk about shifting timelines. Like that timeline already could exist, and it doesn't mean that we have to actually do all that work. We could just all shift to this timeline that's in alignment like that. I mean, that sounds a little preposterous, but reality's, I think, a lot more malleable than we're led to believe in our 3D linear empirical world. And that, there was even something I was just listening to that was talking about how the past is possible to be changed just as much as the future. And of course, we all know about the Mandela effect, that our past is also malleable and then it can change. So who knows, but what it boils down to, though, is that reality is just consciousness.
Your vision is amazing. You talk a lot about the call to inner activation. So, question for you: as we stand at this threshold of the new Earth that you're envisioning, what inner shift must each of us make to truly step through the portal, and how can we begin on that work today?
Yeah, so that's something I personally I really need to work on too, and I do turn to a lot of other people out there that I work with. So I would like to first mention I haven't been working very closely with her recently, but I did work very closely from 2019 when we met until a few years ago, and she's still doing her work. Her name is Z Earth Star Healer. It's spelled XI, and her online academy is just Earth Star Academy. So she's super easy to find on YouTube or through her website, Earth Star Academy. Everything she talks about is just down to earth, common sense, integrating into our human form. And like she says, the one key thing is like to learn to love yourself. And she gives all these other practical, down to earth advice. Meditate, scan your body for hours on end. Just simple things like that to integrate your consciousness, your soul, your spirit into your physical three-dimensional form. But most recently, the person I've been working with, and there's of course there's a slew in between Z Earth Star, but Dr. David Clements, and he's been coming up a lot recently, getting on a lot of big programs and being interviewed. And he has, his Infinite Source Creation, I think, is his website, and he just does these lovely meditations that he just has you go into your heart and connect to that infinite source love. That's that divine source of all. Like the universe is basically just this one being that's love, is one way to sum it up. And that's what's in the center of each of our hearts. So it's as simple as just meditating, going into your heart and connecting to that infinite source love in your heart. And
Such incredible insight, just truly. Let's shift just a moment. I want to talk just a little bit about energy grids. So, energy grids and ancient sites, and what role do these play in the Earth's spiritual awakening?
okay, so I picked up a book right when it was published by that Adventures Unlimited David Childress. It was called Anti-Gravity in the World Grid in 1987. And it has a collection of essays all about the idea of the world grid. Bruce Cathy, some New Zealand pilot, had some really interesting stuff about harmonics. It's a little over the top, but one of the best essays in there was by this guy, Richard Levitin. And he talked about, energies and earth grid and things like that. And so then once I built the first diamond portal, someone said, "Did you ever think of putting your portals on sacred sites and earth energy grid points?" So I researched books on that. And that's when this book that was published, this was 2005, that I just burned the diamond portal at Burning Man. So it was gone. And I found this book published in 2004 by Richard Levitin called The Emerald Modem, a user's guide to the Earth's interactive energy body. And in the introduction to the book, he explains that none of the information in the book is scientifically or empirically verifiable. It all came to him by doing a meditation where he focused actually on his lower dantian, like his belly button, on a pinprick of light until that pinprick of light expanded, encompassing his whole body. And then once he was inside of this, these angels and beings, the seraphim and the Elohim, came to him and instructed him on all these different energetic features, that the earth is actually constructed by higher dimensional beings with a lot of different, not just a ley line and energy grid, but like over 80 features in this book about how the earth functions cosmically and energetically. So it's not just a random ball of dirt, but it's a highly consciously created by higher dimensional beings place for humans and everything. Like, humans are basically, as some other people would say, we're like a mix of like 22 different ET species. We're like a galactic interstellar war embodied in our own bodies. But so the Earth energy grid. So in that book, towards the end of it, he talks about these geometries that the Earth ley line grids are, and that they hold the consciousness that's on the Earth throughout the whole evolution through the millions of years. And at the shift taking place, these geometries are evolving. So that's where I started to use these geometries in my structures as what I call the evolution of the Earth's vibrational energy body to align our multidimensional vibrational energy body to them to facilitate this shift of consciousness. So, it's kind of pretty straightforward on that level, that just you don't have to know what these geometries are, but to know, just to inhabit them would hopefully be useful for this ability to help align us to the evolving energy grids and our own personal evolution of our energy grids in this evolution of consciousness.
Yeah, you definitely hit the nail right on the head with sound functioning as a transformative force in individuals and ecosystems, and also the sacred geometry. You also emphasize the 64 tetrahedron grid. You want to talk a little bit about that?
I got exposed to the work of the physicist Nassim Haramein back in 2005, but he was the one that discovered this shape called a 64 tetrahedron. And I love teaching about it. We're not going to go into the details of it. That'll be either if you go watch my sacred geometry video on my YouTube channel, or maybe when I do another talk with Phil, in December or something, we'll go into the details of it. But essentially, Buckminster Fuller discovered a shape. It's the cube octahedron, which is halfway between a cube and an octahedron, but it's connected in the middle. And Buckminster Fuller called this shape the vector equilibrium. And that's because all of the vectors from the center going out to the corners are the same as all the vectors that go around in the hexagons, which means that energetically this shape would neither collapse or explode. It's an equilibrium. But that wasn't the final answer to how energy in the universe is distributed in equilibrium. And it's Nassim Haramein that came up with the completing of that. And if you take the opposite of a vector equilibrium is 8 tetrahedrons pointing in, a star tetrahedron, which is very famously known as the Merkaba, which is 2 interpenetrating tetrahedrons, or is actually 8 tetrahedrons around a central octahedron, 8 tetrahedrons pointing out. If you interpenetrate a star tetrahedron and the vector equilibrium, they overlap in such a way that they make 8 star tetrahedrons all coming together radially, or they make concentrically nested vector equilibriums, a half size or double size ones. So it's the perfect complement of inward pointing tetrahedrons and outward pointing tetrahedrons. And so essentially, the 64 tetrahedron grid, he calls it the structure of the vacuum. And what it means is at the Planck's level, and Max Planck discovered the max, the max distance way back at the dawn of quantum physics. And it's a unit of measurement that's the shortest possible length in our three-dimensional physical universe. And what it is that there are the same number of Planck's spherical units, if you took that length inside of one proton, as there are protons in the entire visible universe. It's trillions and trillions and trillions of times smaller than an atom. It's not only like the size of a Planck's length is to an atom as an atom is to a human. It's the size of a Planck's length is to an atom as an atom is to the whole universe. And the idea is that at the Planck's level of energy, it's all organized into this 64 tetrahedron structure that is canceling out to look like a vacuum. And there's a thing in quantum physics called the vacuum catastrophe. This is a real thing. It's a crazy name, but it's that in quantum physics, scientists have discovered that there's nearly infinite amount of energy in the vacuum. And this is how it completely cancels out is shape. But what I really love is I've studied Tibetan Buddhism, and one of the key meditations, if you're just going to do one meditation in Tibetan Buddhism, it's the Heart Sutra. Again, going back to activating the heart. But the Heart Sutra starts out by saying, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Structure, form. Emptiness, vacuum. Structure of the vacuum, the form of the emptiness. Once you understand the form of the emptiness, the structure of the vacuum, you see how our three-dimensional reality comes into being by understanding at that infinitely small quantum level that the structure of the vacuum, the 64 tetrahedron grid, is that. And then the last thing I like to show, and we'll see this, is that when you projected all the intersections of that 64 tetrahedron grid lines up perfectly with the flower of life, which of course in two-dimensional sacred geometry we see all the time.
I'd like to open
Yeah.
it up. Any of you have any questions for him?
No, but I again want to say, wow. I mean, I've played music on this show for 6 years. You're at the top of the list, Harlan. You have got so much energy and so much information. I'm just so grateful you came to be with us today. Thank you.
This was so great. I'm so grateful for Phil inviting me on. And Matt, you did such a great job of, understanding, what I'm about, and then, asking me great prompts to cover all this information. So I really feel like we covered pretty much everything I wanted to, in this time together. So thank you so much. I have my website, which is portaltothenewearth.com, and that has links. My book is actually available both as a limited edition of 1111 copies, because that was the original Diamond Portal. And it's funny, I didn't get to change my background too much, but besides, here was the interdimensional space-time portal. We'll throw it in at the end, and then my latest lotus flower. So I built a lot of others, but the 1111 Diamond Portal is on the cover of the book. So there's only 1111 hardcover copies, but the PDFs available. And then there's a link directly to my YouTube channel, which is exactly the same thing, Portal to the New Earth on YouTube. And so you could easily access various, like I said, that sacred geometry video, or interviews with all kinds of interesting people, or short videos showing the different portal installations. So please, go subscribe to that, and or send, order a copy of the book or whatever it is for whoever's watching this. If you're inspired by this, please, just help spread the word.
And we're definitely in a future of co-creation. So we appreciate your words. Just incredible. Your energy, beautiful. We will see you all next week on Cosmic Conversations, and I appreciate you, Harlan, again, and Susie, and take care, everyone. Have a great week.